Welcome to Digitel Talk podcast, where we spotlight entrepreneurs and innovators leveraging technology related to telecoms to drive positive global impact. I'm here with my co-host, Frankie, and we'll be talking today with Dr. Bilel Jamoussi, who is the Deputy Director of the ITU, the lead UN agency for digital technologies, for over 13 years and currently holding position as the Deputy Director of the Telecommunications Standardisation Bureau, otherwise known as TSB.
Today's episode is sponsored by IFG Consulting Europe, a leading business growth consultancy representing promising software providers selling to the telecoms, enterprise and mobile markets in Europe. Go to ifgconsultingeurope.com to find out more.
Hi, Frankie. What are you interested in hearing about today?
Hi, Ian. As many of our listeners might know, I am a fan of standardization and regulation. I think that it allows for efficiency, especially within our field, and speed and cost effectiveness and community and societal benefits. So there's a lot of value that the ITU brings to the ITC industry as a whole. And I'm really interested in seeing what Dr. Jamoussi's role is there and how they are really working to keep those UN sustainability goals front of mind as one of the major bodies for the UN. So what I would like to do, Ian, is without any further ado, is to welcome our guest, Dr. Jamoussi. Dr. Jamoussi, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Frankie and Ian.
So do you mind just introducing yourself?
With pleasure. So my name is Bilel. I'm the Deputy Director of the Standards Bureau. And really my role here is to provide the platform for standards development for our 194 member states, over 1,000 private sector entities and 200 universities around the world, so that we can connect the world and provide sustainable digital transformation standards.
Very good. And I see that you're busy. You've got an event coming up, I think, is it next week, which is the World Telecommunication Standardization Assembly on the 15th to 20th of October. What are the hot topics that you'll be discussing there?
This assembly is something we hold every 4 years, and it really sets the priority for the standardization sector for the next 4 years. It appoints the leadership team, the chairs and vice chairs of the various groups that develop standards, and adopts new resolutions on topics of priority for the next 4 years. In terms of proposals that we have received, we have about 13 new topics, including, not surprisingly, artificial intelligence, the metaverse, digital public infrastructure, emergency communications, and so on and so forth. So many of the hot topics that are top of mind for governments and for the private sector will be on the agenda during our first assembly in Asia.
Wow. And one of the things that is challenging about our industry is the speed in which we move ahead, which can make it challenging for bodies like the ITU, especially across such a broad sector, to stay ahead in the way that standards are being created. When you're planning for a 4-year period, is that something that is challenging for your team, or do you have structures built in place to allow for the real-timeness of our industry?
Of course, we have a lot of agility as ITU. These are very high-level resolutions that kind of guide what topics, generally speaking. But the study groups that will be established at this assembly and the leadership team that will guide them would have flexibility over the next 4 years to adjust and add new work items that the industry brings to the table.
What's that sort of cycle look like? So within a 4-year broad period, are you reviewing new entrants or new technologies or new needs for these standardizations every quarter, every year?
So after the assembly is concluded and resolutions are appointed and so on, the study groups meet on a regular basis. Every 9 months or so, they have a plenary meeting where they can approve new standards. And in between, the smaller working groups will meet on a daily basis. And industry and governments get together to adjust and propose new topics. Every month we have something new. So in that respect, that's where the agility and the timeliness of the standard comes in.
You mentioned things like the metaverse, AI, quantum, digital public infrastructure. Another one I think you mentioned was an open forum wallet or some new initiative with Linux. Do you want to explain what that is?
Yes, as part of the digital transformation is to be able to have a digital identifier, to be able to transact money using mobile or digital services. And so basically the physical wallet that has the ID and all of these payment cards and so on, the idea is to how can you transform them into the digital space, and to do that in a standardized way, in a very agile way. So there is work in the Linux Foundation, something called the Open Wallet Foundation, that is underway. And recently in May, we launched a new Open Wallet Forum, which is a collaboration by the ITU and the Linux Foundation to accelerate the development of these digital public infrastructure, if you will, by combining standards efforts as well as the open source implementation, and having governments form a consultative committee to guide their needs in terms of digital public infrastructure and open wallet implementations.
Fantastic.
In an age where we are hearing more frequently terms coined like bankruptcy G, do you think that solutions like open source are perhaps a little late? Is that maybe something that standardization and regulation should have taken a harder stance on a generation ago rather than where we are today? Is there an insurmountable hill at this point?
I would say in the past, the open source work and the standardization work were going at different speeds and without a lot of necessarily a lot of coordination. What we are excited about now is that we have a more open interface between the traditional standards community and the open source community to make sure that the two processes work in sync. We had one example of a standard a few years ago published by the ITU on the use of AI and machine learning in managing 5G networks. And we noticed that the number of downloads of that standard picked up like a hockey stick. And the reason is that the working group, or the study group 13 that was working on it, had an open source implementation in GitHub. And so that created a really interesting dynamic of synergies between the standard setters and the implementers of the code in open source. So I think going forward, having that closer collaboration, for example, the CEO of the Linux Foundation will be one of the speakers at the Global Standards Symposium in India when we have the WTSA. And working together in lockstep, I think will ensure that whatever is developed in open source meets real problems and is guided by the end users, whether they're governments or private sector.
I see that another topic is, and I think most likely everyone's had enough of it in the last year or so, I believe that AI is gaining prominence and is one of those things which we're all hearing about. And I see the ITU have got is it Tech for Good or Good Initiative? AI for Good.
AI for Good
Initiative, yes. So you've got an AI for Good initiative. And what are you trying to achieve in that area? Because we know that anything like a baseball bat, it can be used to hit a ball or it can be used to hit something else. So I guess AI is a tool, but how are you guys trying to form and shape that?
So AI for Good was an initiative the ITU launched in 2017, way before generative AI made AI popular household item. And the reason we launched it then was we saw that the Sustainable Development Goals were behind and that AI is a new tool that can really accelerate achieving the SDGs. And so we've been working since then with many partners in the UN system and with the private sector on identifying problems that could be solved better with AI. And that's why we called it AI for Good. It's really how to use this new tool to achieve the SDGs. So to give you some concrete examples of work that we have done over the past 7 or 8 years, we developed a suite of standards for AI for health with the WHO, benchmarking of AI for health algorithms, regulatory framework, ethical guidelines, data processing and data interfaces. And we have done the same with other UN partners, for example, with the Food and Agriculture Organization on the use of AI in agriculture. How do you optimize crop production using AI? And a third example, which I'm really excited about, and we just published an article in Nature magazine just 2 days ago, is the use of AI for natural disaster management.
Okay.
Using satellite imaging, IoT devices to detect natural disasters. And I'm sure this is topical for you now with what's going on in your area. AI is a tremendous tool for early warning, for identifying the right people to warn. And the communication devices that the Early Warning for All is an initiative of the UN Secretary General, that the ITU and the World Meteorological Organization are partnering with many others to ensure that once we detect something quickly using AI and other tools, we can warn the populations that are impacted.
Very interesting.
This is one of the reasons why AI and energy consumption have to really remain so linked, because what it can do for us as a society on a global scale in addressing some of these innately super complex challenges that face us all. And yet, one of our other guests, who was, I believe, the director of the Fiber to the Home Council in Europe, he's saying to do a ChatGPT search, right, takes 10 times more energy than it does to do a Google search. And certainly our listeners are within the industry, but for most people, they don't understand that major consumption difference in the two technologies. How is the ITU taking that magnitude consumption difference into consideration to balance it when applying to these much bigger challenges that we need it for?
Absolutely. This is a topic we just recently published a report on AI and the environment and the international standards for AI and the environment. And there we highlight that AI, there are two sides to the coin. On one hand, as you mentioned, there is high energy consumption. There are data centers and so on that have consumption of various resources, water and energy, etc. But on the other hand, AI can be used to optimize resources and reduce the power consumption of other sectors. For instance, AI is used to optimize routes of buses and various transportation mechanisms. Once you collect the big data of mobile users and their presence during the morning rush hour and the evening rush hour, with that data, you can optimize how you place various public transportation means and others. And so that's one example on how AI could be used to optimize and reduce energy consumption and greenhouse gas emission in other sectors. So we need to take those two aspects in consideration. But also in the ITU, we have a study group that works on the environmental efficiency and how to measure, manage, and mitigate the environmental impact of AI, where product vendors, data center vendors, network operators, when they use common methodology to measure the impact, then we can have a conversation about the reduction of the consumption that is uniform and scales across the different sectors. So that's how we're trying to tackle this issue of AI and energy consumption, by looking at both the positive and the negative side. And on the negative side, having mechanisms for the industry to measure the impact and then reduce it by various means, including eventually the use of quantum computers, which are more energy efficient while providing significant power for computation. So even though today we're using traditional processors, but in the very near future, we'll be using more of the quantum computer to help with the AI massive processing of data.
I have to share a little story about Mobile World Congress this year, because there is a quantum computer in Barcelona. that scale that you're talking about and that computing power is very much what was with Google and now is with AI. And the supercomputer, I think it's with the University of Barcelona that's there, which is a beautiful display that represented with sand. And there was nothing else. I was like, what is this sandbox in the middle of Mobile World Congress? Mm-hmm. And when I finally got around to understanding it, the impact of having some perception, some visual perception of that scale with quantum computing is just mind-blowing. And I don't want to take us too off track from what you were saying with the energy consumption, because really measuring is a very challenging thing, identifying it and measuring it. And with the UN sustainability goals and the standards that you guys are putting out, this is becoming easier to do, not simple and not yet standard, but easier for our industry to do, where it has been really challenging. Are there very specific tools and things that members can use to help do measurements and participate in these reports? Is that something where even if they're not an ITU member, they could contribute?
Absolutely. All of our standards are publicly available. So once we have approval, they're published on our website and they can be downloaded and used by anyone. And of course, we have often focus groups that are open to non-members where some of these conversations can be had. One of the reasons we hold the AI for Good Summit every year is to have that multi-stakeholder dialogue on key topics around AI. That includes government, industry, private sector, civil society. In terms of the net zero and the fact that industry needs to reduce the temperature by 1.5 degrees, we have standards development. One standard that is published called L1470, that's an ITU standard number, which provides a pathway for the ICT emission reduction. How can industry reduce the ICT emission? And guidelines on the best practice for energy efficiency. And this way, the ITU helps ensure that the industry aligns with the goals of the climate target. And this is a widely adopted standard that was developed in collaboration with the GSMA, with GESI, BTI, the IEA. So we're quite confident that the implementation of this standard could be an important first step towards meeting those goals. And this was developed, as I mentioned, with the broad participation of all stakeholders. And to really bring this conversation to the policymakers and negotiators at the COP29 in Azerbaijan, that will be just in November, we launched the Green Digital Action with many partners, including ISO and IEC, the other two international standards organizations here in Geneva, to highlight the critical role of digital technologies in combating climate change and the importance of using standards tools in that dialogue. And in Azerbaijan, we'll have the first ministerial panel or ministerial declaration on the use of digital in greening various industries. So we're really excited about elevating the conversation in COP, where digital was never discussed before or very little discussed, to something that would be a ministerial declaration at this level.
Very, very interesting indeed. And if we think of the guide rails around AI as well, as coming back to the analogy of the baseball bat, how do we then, and what are you doing in that area to make sure that people actually using it for good, AI for good in the broader sense, and what can we do as a society in that sense? And I want to bring in one more aspect, which I think Frankie also mentioned about a conversation with a gentleman from the FFTH European Council, which was, he was saying is, it can be used frivolously, if you like. So basically, people are using these technologies for fun. And in a way, there's always going to have to be this balance between, we're talking about power and consumption, but in a way, how can we make sure these things are used in a more targeted way?
One of the topics that came up at our AI for Good Summit is the use of deepfakes and generative AI to create disinformation, misinformation.
Right, falseness.
Whether falseness with text, or it could be images that are generated by AI or modified, videos also. And this is especially important this year because of all the elections going on around the world. There is 2 billion people going to vote in 76 countries, if I remember correctly. So
that's an astonishing fact.
It is. And having deepfakes for candidates is really damaging. And the ministers who were here in Geneva, about 30 different ministers from around the world, the developed and developing countries, they all were asking for solutions. The good news is that at the AI for Good Summit, we had a full day on deepfakes and how to combat them using various standards that are in existence by the ITU, by the ISO, the International Standards Organization, C2PA, IEEE, IETF, and so on. And so at the end of the summit, we launched a collaboration on multimedia authenticity and deepfake detection. And we have been since then meeting almost on a weekly basis. And soon we'll be publishing a roadmap or a sort of putting all the pieces of the puzzle, because each one of us was working on a particular set of the problem. And now we're putting it all together and making it as an easy to use tool by policymakers. Because that's when, going back to your question, Ian, that's how you combat the bad, by providing the policymakers with the tools to deal with it. And we, the standards community, have this collaboration to ensure that when you have new policy, you have tools to implement it.
And when we talk about ethics in AI and being able to push things towards a diverse, equal playing field, both in the development and then in the deployment of these technologies. Obviously, the unconnected is a broad topic for us with most of our guests. With organizations like the ITU at a higher level, that can even start simpler, like women in leadership roles or women having access to technology to be able to have learning and teachings going on. There's something within the ITU that's really focused on that and helping to keep the ethics of what we're creating as unbiased going in as they are coming out.
Absolutely. The inclusiveness is a big agenda item in the ITU for youth, for women, for developing countries, for people with disabilities, having accessible information and communication technologies. These are all high-level priorities for us because we serve the entire world, the 194 member states. We have all the industry as members in the ITU, and of course, the people we serve is the entire world population with various differences in linguistic and cultural and gender and so on. At the WTSA, we will have a network of women in standards day to highlight the importance of parity in standards development and leadership. We are still far away. We are only at 30% participation by women in our study groups, in our standards development activities. And we use that to ensure that our member states and private sector, when they come with delegations to our meetings, they think of gender parity. And when they nominate women or people for leadership, they can include women in the leadership positions of these groups. Because a lot of the standards have a gender aspect, and the shape of the phone or the way you use all of these ICT devices have a gender aspect to it and need to be taken into account. The other aspect of our inclusiveness is the bridging the standardization gap, because if you look at the countries who develop products and services that are sold, it's maybe 20 to 40 countries around the world, but the rest of the world uses it. And so how do we make sure that the user of the technology participates in at least setting the requirements of the standard? And that's where bridging the gap comes in. In terms of implementation, we try to help accelerate the implementation of new standards by having workshops, seminars, capacity building. On the topic of AI, we've been holding challenges. So we invite universities from developing countries to participate in problem solving, and we provide them with access to compute services like Amazon Web Service and so on that may not have access at home. All they need is a connection and a laptop and a smart person behind it to develop new solutions. And that has been tremendous in creating new capacity on AI and data science. We have close to 20,000 students and professors now active in our various challenges of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So capacity building is one of the priorities for ITU as a whole. I'm in the standardization sector. We have an entire sector in the ITU on the development sector that has the priority of capacity building in developing countries.
Yeah.
I was recently at an event of senior people in the telecom sector, and we were talking about the standards and particularly 6G. And you always get the feeling that it's always about creating faster or more efficient capacity, if you like. But then the room turned around and said, but I can't get a signal next door. So actually creating ubiquitous connectivity seems to be actually more important. Is there anything that you can help with steering some of these, particularly telco standardization bodies towards that? Because I think we're somehow missing the trick until we get the 3 billion. And both, by the way, just to declare an interest here, Frankie and I are both ambassadors of the unconnected.org, which is a charity. 3 billion who are underserved for sure. So any comments on that and how that can be pushed forward?
Yes, we have two strategic priorities in the ITU. One is to universal connectivity, and the other sustainable digital transformation. This was set by our membership in 2022 as our strategic priority for 22 to 26. On the connectivity issue, our statistics show, the ITU report shows 2.4 billion people unconnected today. So our Secretary General put in place a couple of programs to ensure we reduce that gap. One is the Partner to Connect, which is an initiative to have pledges by governments and private sector with a target of $100 billion by 2030. Okay. We are halfway through, so we still have a lot of work to do.
But you have some big commitments for that already. That's a program that's doing very well.
Absolutely. And we hope to be able to use that to reduce the number of unconnected. We also have a partnership with UNICEF on GIGA, which is to connect schools. And that's where the ITU and UNICEF are using AI, for example, as a tool to help map where schools are not connected. And then once we have the connectivity map in place, then connected with a Partner to Connect to make some investment in connecting schools. Because once you connect a school, you connect a community. So these are some of the tools that we have in place. And of course, the standards we have, basically all of the fiber optic networks around the world are using ITU standards. Yeah. And we're very proud of that. The FTTH partners are based on ITU standards. And FTTH is another solution that is quite energy efficient compared to copper.
So Vincent Garnier, who is the Director General, he has a podcast with us very recently, and he gave the shout out to you guys actually for your standards work. So there you go. That's great.
Even in our interview with FTTH, standards bodies sometimes can be seen as a stick in the mud. Why can't we just do it this way? Now, certainly in our sector, there's a lot that has to be done that way. But do you find, you've been in your role 13 years, do you find any real kickback from the industry or pushback around certain topics that still are a major challenge for this kind of unified communications moving forward?
If you're talking about speed, I think if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. So to connect the world, we need to go together. And that's where organizations like the ITU and our partners play a key role in global connectivity. I mentioned 90% or 95% of the world internet runs on fiber optic networks developed, standardized in the ITU. 80% of the internet traffic is video, using the video codec that was developed by ITU, ISO, and IEC, the MPEG-4, we call it H265. So in order to have global impact, we need a bit of time to develop a standard where you have industry and governments and everyone around the table to push it forward.
Aligned.
Like there are 9 billion telephone numbers used today. That's an ITU standard. And the reason we can communicate very easily is that we have one standard on telephone numbering system, whether it's for people or for machines. So some of it is used for machine to machine and IoT. But that doesn't mean we have to go slow. We can go fast by playing and working with the open source community. Usually software development runs very fast, and you can guide it by some standards development. We have focus groups that are open to non-members, and they have been tremendous in the digital transformation Today, the ITU has 4 different car manufacturers who are members of the International Telecom Union because cars are connected.
Yes.
When you buy a new car,
That's
you have
right.
2 SIM cards. So you have 2 telephone numbers and you have to be connected to the network, whether it's V2V, V2X, and software downloads. And so the agility comes from modifying our working methods to the context. And the context today is digital transformation. And so we need to open up for car manufacturers, banks, agriculture, healthcare, to be able to integrate with the digital platform.
So you make some interesting points. And one of the things which you were talking about earlier on about being able to measure, if you measure it, then we can have a conversation. So there is now, certainly in Europe, I guess it's internationally, the ESG reports required for corporations. Do you think they are a good starting point, or do you think they're also sufficient to move this agenda along regarding trying to improve the way corporations act as good citizens, let's say?
I think the SDGs is a good starting point, but sometimes needs a next level of detail in terms of the actual KPIs, the key performance indirect indicators, and also having a common standard set of indicators. And so that's where our standards come in. So, for example, for the environmental sustainability or e-waste, energy efficiency, having those standards would allow us to compare apple to apple. In terms of smart, sustainable cities, we also developed a set of KPIs, 130 data points that are now implemented by 200 cities around the world. So cities can measure their sustainability and smartness. And then over years, they can track whether they have improved or not. And it has been a really useful tool for many cities around the world. So having those standards is the base, and then you can go from it.
And this is the kind of magnitude, numbers, data input, efficiencies where AI really comes into play. It's not about, can AI find me a better cat video? Yes, it can. Can it recite me the Declaration of Independence? Yes, it can. Can it do it in 100 languages? Yes, it can. It's not challenging, right? What is challenging is exactly what you're talking about here. You talked about bus data. You talked about these smart cities, talking about millions and millions of data points. Do you find that these standards, the ESG, the SDGs, are harder for telco companies to produce a result in a tangible way, since they underpin everything, that it's just going to be incremental and we're just going to have to be okay with that incremental growth over time?
To some extent. A few years ago, we had a CXO meeting. We usually have a meeting with the C-level executives of industry. And one of the CTOs from Canada with an IBM and TELUS, so they came with a problem statement saying, look, we want to report on our ESG and map to the SDGs, but we don't have the next level of granularity. Right. And every company is measuring things differently. We don't have a common set of KPIs. And that's where some of this engagement in our study group 5 on the environmental aspects of networks kicked off to provide a uniform way of measuring the ICT impact of the network, the data center, the ICT device. That way you can break it down into the various components for the communication infrastructure that is used by the end user. Yes, it is difficult, but the good news is through this engagement with industry and the dialogue with the executives, then we can have our standards experts focus on the right problems to be solved.
So what do you think then is the most urgent SDG that operators should address?
Well, SDG 9 is where we play mostly. It's the infrastructure, tying it back to the 2.4 billion unconnected, tying it back to the digital transformation and the need for efficient data centers to provide services to citizens, digital services. So I think that's where we focus. And also the SDG related to the planet and the sustainability. And that's where I think there is an intersection between those two sustainable development goals.
So let me ask you a question, because most of the telco stuff that we've discussed, we're talking about energy consumption to the infrastructure through the network, right? But technology has a very real impact on our planet on a device side, e-waste all the way down to the unfortunate consumption of disposable vapes right now. I know that's not technology, but you've got a battery in there, you've got chargers and a phone, especially a 5G phone or even a 3 or 4G, which are still some of the most prevalent devices on the planet. Are there standards? Is the ITU looking at both ends of this scale?
Indeed. We have work on e-waste management and circular economy practices. In 2011, we published our universal charger standard. And I think 2 years ago, the European Union adopted it as a regulation in the entire European Union space. And so that has a significant reduction on e-waste because you don't have to buy a charger with every phone or ICT device you use. And having a universal connector allows you to use the charger with different devices and reduce thousands of tons of e-waste.
The consumption and the throwing away of it, both is reduced because you really don't need it, because that consumption then begins to consume natural resources from our planet, going back to the circular economy of this. If we forget it and it's not the right one, we have to buy another one, just adds to the problem. I thought I heard you said 2011 you published that standard?
Yes.
I thought you said 2021 in my head, because that is, why does it take, and maybe you don't have this, why did it take major industry, Apple leaders so much time? That's a whole decade. And I think they did 60 million tons of e-waste in one weekend with their chargers. What's that delay? Why does that have to take so long?
It's an ongoing process. It's an onboarding process. Consensus takes time to build, and adoption is also something, because our standards are voluntary and it's up to governments and companies to implement them. But the European Union finally decided to put regulation in place. And when they did, all the manufacturers who sell in Europe have to comply with this directive. And so then the standard needs to be implemented.
That's the thing about policy, right? At the end of the day, policies then get implemented and enforced at the other side. We are at the point that, from our conversation, that lots of our listeners will be people from the telco community. How could they get in touch? Best way of them getting involved? What's a good starting point if you want to get involved with the ITU?
Join one of our study groups if you have a particular interest in fiber optics or video coding or quality of service, numbering. We have 10 different study groups that are open to our members, member states, even small and medium enterprises and universities. And you can also join any of our focus groups that are open to non-members. But definitely don't miss the AI for Good Summit that will be in July. Next year here in Geneva. It's the biggest event in town. We have outgrown the CICG, which is the conference center here next door to ITU, and we'll be going to Palexpo, which is the biggest expo next to the airport. And that's where all the stakeholders around AI come in.
And you have a wonderful hybrid experience with that event that I have participated in, I think the last 2 years at least, both on the phone and online, that the hybrid experience continues all year long within those
absolutely, Frankie,
applications and those digital applications.
Every week we have a different webinar on an AI for Good application where we bring top thought leaders to discuss for 30 to 60 minutes. And we have the neural network, which is our platform to connect people.
Fantastic.
And it's a great network because really, if you're looking for how AI is being used, their neural network individually within industry or within government, a lot of the stakeholders are already on the neural network app. They're participating in these. There's constant conversation. And again, with the ITU, you guys are at the hub. You're the center of things. I can't imagine how frustrating 11 years of having a standard sit there waiting for it to be adopted could possibly be. So my heart and my hope for your continued strength and effort in what you do to continue persevering, it really goes out to you, because what you're doing and what it means tangibly for our planet is so very important.
Thank you.
So I think we'd like to give a little shout out about you actually and the work you're doing, but this is also an opportunity for for you maybe to give a shout out to someone else or a group or whatever, or activity that you think's worth shouting out about on this podcast?
Yeah, I'll do shout out to ISO and IEC, our two international standards partners here in Geneva. We have an amazing collaboration on AI standards on the AI International Standards Summit, which is really one of the calls to action from the Global Digital Compact that was approved just last week in New York by the General Assembly.
Good.
So we're very excited about the AI International Standards Summit that we're doing with ISO and IEC.
So the collaboration there is working really well. That's fantastic
Indeed.
to hear that. So this gives us the opportunity to change tact in this podcast. Really appreciate hearing about the ITU and all the great work you're doing. But behind that, there is a person. And we would like to know a little bit about you. And so the first question we like to ask is, do you have a philosophy of life?
Strive for excellence.
Okay.
And I have found that with our guests and with myself, with this kind of work, when you're really driven to be focused on a greater good, something that is not just singular, but perhaps has win in its strategy as a constant underlying theme, that this desire has to come from somewhere in your life. Is there something that you can pinpoint that made you an advocate or a champion in your life?
For standards or for technology?
For standards, for technology in general. For me, I find that I'm an advocate for any really underdog situation, right? Telcos, the MVNOs, the Humane Society, right? So it drives whatever that is. And to do this kind of work where something can sit on the shelf for a decade while it's the right thing to be doing, you have to have something that keeps you going at this. Yes.
Yeah, I think the intersection of technology, business, and diplomacy is a fascinating place to be. And when I moved from the private sector in 2010 to ITU at that time, it's a completely different game. I was part of a company that builds and sells products, so everything was about profit and loss and numbers at the end of the year. But here it's more about a global impact. It's about connecting people. It's about 194 countries that come together, different languages, different cultures. And so being able to have a global impact is fascinating. And it needs some really skills, knowing the technology, knowing the business or the commercial aspect, and knowing the diplomatic or the geopolitical requirements of different countries and so on. So when you put it all together, it makes it quite interesting and exciting.
Certainly.
Given your journey, did you have any idea what you're going to be as a teenager?
I wanted to be a pilot.
Of what?
Airplanes.
Any plane? Okay. I realize the things that fly in the sky,
like
right?
a commercial pilot. Yeah.
And what about, have you got a particular passion, would you say?
I think my passion is psychology. Human psychology is most intriguing. And it comes every day in negotiation, in people management, at home, in the streets, at work, everywhere.
Yeah, I imagine you have to use a lot in your current job, right? As you said, it's a skill set very relevant for what you're doing.
And diplomacy, I keep thinking it's one thing when you have a whole bunch of people who want to be in government. It's another thing when you have the CEOs and board of major industries and institutions sitting around and trying to convince them to do something or to cooperate with each other. Certainly psychology must come a lot into play in those environments as well.
Indeed.
And if we move on to your life outside of work, not that given that your job, theoretically, you could work 24/7, 365 days a year, because the sun never sets on your work, right? So fundamentally, So what are you doing? And do you have any downtime, and what do you get up to?
Family. My 3 young men and my wife are my life outside of the office.
And you've gone and visited, no doubt, some amazing places in your time. Anything that's left a particular impact on you and your views?
I think my home country, Tunisia, remains the one that has the most impact, even though I only lived there 18 years, my first 18 years. And then I'm off to school in the US and worked in Canada, now working in Switzerland. But certainly Tunisia has always a very profound and deep impact on me.
And is it because you were born there and your family comes there? It's your heritage, or is there a particular aspect of being Tunisian that has given you skills or capabilities, or is it a particular place?
I think both. Tunisia is at the crossroads of cultures, and geographically it's between Africa and Europe, north and south, and historically has always been at the crossroad of civilizations, from Carthage to the Islamic civilization to now part of the Mediterranean environment. So it is a very unique place in the world, amazing, very nice beaches, nice food, nice people, multilingual. So it's always fascinating to go back and visit.
Very good. Good springboard.
And so in our quest for tech that does good, is there something from science fiction or something that you grew up with that we haven't quite brought to fruition in the world in front of us that you still wished was real?
Teleportation. Especially after long trips, when you have to be in a plane for 14 hours, you say, I wish the teleportation was possible.
When are we going to get our focus group on teleportation? Because I'll tell you, it's the number one answer.
And what legacy would you like to leave?
I think a legacy of excellence and compassion, to really make sure that everyone around me feels that I had something positive to contribute to their life.
Yeah. So you're touching other people. That's very nice. Yeah.
I would say that also compassion is sorely missing from most of us in our constant thinking about ourselves always. And right now, as, what did you say? How many billion people are going to vote in the next 6 weeks?
2 billion.
2 billion. We should all really be compassionate walking into that moment and think about others other than just ourselves. And on that note, my favorite question of the whole interview, just hopefully at the end of this, I'll have some measurements to make some decisions with. Are you Apple or Android?
Android.
Aha, see, it's really winning among the techies, that Android.
And can you elaborate on why?
I think from many years ago, my kids had Apple and I wanted to try something different. And I just found it a bit more flexible and open. And then once you get used to something, you stay with it. That's
certainly.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been great to talk to you and learn about the great work the ITU are doing today and will continue to do for society and the greater good. And I think it's great stuff. So our podcast hopefully is also helping you to get your message out there, and we're hopefully doing our bit as well to contribute to it.
Yeah, and certainly for me, a lot of young girls would fangirl out about some movie star or whatever else the case may be. But the director general, the deputy directors of these kind of institutions like yourself, Dr. Jamoussi, who are out there, this is hard work. It is detailed work. It is extremely important and extremely impactful. And so I just really appreciate you joining us today. And it was such a pleasure to meet you and speak with you.
It's been a pleasure to be on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to our new podcast. If you have any feedback or know of any stories to be told involving digital technology and telecoms doing good, then please do let us know via our email, getinTouch@digiteltalk.com. Also, feel free to send us a message on LinkedIn. It'd be great to hear from you.
Before we go, if you've enjoyed today's episode and would like to support the podcast, then don't forget to give us a follow and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Also, if you'd like to leave us a review or share it with your colleagues, it really helps us on the channel. Thanks so much for being a part of our audience today, and hopefully you'll join us next time.
That's all we've got time for, so it's goodbye from me.
And that's goodbye from him.
Bye
for now.
now.